Hello, Wolfpack. I want to talk about the bullish scenario for Bitcoin, the bullish scenario that I am seeing for Bitcoin, because I personally don't think this chart looks good. Okay, I've said that multiple times. We may see a little dead cat bounce, but I don't think it looks too good, right? 53K is probably the highest we'll get on Bitcoin, in my opinion. And there's not really too much to update since yesterday on the Bitcoin chart. And so if you want my Bitcoin analysis, just go to yesterday's video, right? Same thing's happening. We're in the same price region. We're just kind of consolidating in that 40 to 42K area. We had a brief drop below, but it wasn't sustained, and so it doesn't really matter to me that much. However, what we are seeing on Bitcoin is what I'm seeing is a bullish scenario, right? And I don't think, before I say this, I don't think this scenario is likely to play out, right? I think this is unlikely to play out, but I think it is likely enough for us to consider it, okay? Because I still think that, I'm bearish in the market. I still think the bearish scenario is going to play out. But let's draw out what we see here. We see a ascending wedge formation on Bitcoin. I know what you're thinking. Ascending wedge is typically a bearish formation, and you'd be correct in saying that. However, this early into the wedge, on a longer term scale, it wouldn't be obscene for us to actually see another swing back to the upside and retest the top of the wedge, right? So right now, what is worth noting is that we're not only testing the bottom of the wedge, but we're also testing the bottom of the wedge on top of a major support zone historically on Bitcoin, right? And that is this green box here between 40K and around 42K. All right, so we're testing the bottom of the wedge right on top of a major support zone, which would indicate that we actually do have a decent chance of holding that wedge. Obviously, however, you need to consider that just because we hold the bottom of this wedge in the short term, right? For example, if we do see that dead cat bounce up to 53K, doesn't mean we need to go all the way up to the top, okay? Obviously, holding a wedge in the short term is an indication that you will be going up to the top side, sooner rather than later, or the next move would be a top side move. So, usually when you hold a wedge, or even in triangles or channels, when you test the bottom, the next logical step is testing the top. However, on a longer term scale like this, where there's so many resistance indicators in between those two things, it's not the same as a short term price wedge, right? There's lots of different factors that come into play, and there's no guarantee at all if we bounce from this region that we'll be retesting the top. All right, we could very well just see a little bounce, a dead cat bounce here, and then a drop down below the wedge. Okay, that is very possible. However, there is the likelihood, there is a chance, right? And I'm not going to discount it completely because it does still stand true, that there is a chance, especially considering we're on a major support zone right now, that we will regain bullishness and see something like this, right? A swing back to the top of the wedge. That swing, in my opinion, would take us up to the low to mid 70K regions. What we can do is we can take a measurement of how long it usually takes to get to the top of the wedge, okay? So what happens here on Bitcoin, from a test of the bottom to the test of the top here took 175 days, okay? From a test of the bottom to the test of the top here took around 112 days. We have to consider the wedges tightening, and so if we remove 60 days there between those two tests, we remove another 60 days, we're taking around maybe let's say 70 days to get to the top of the wedge, just an estimate. So if we were going to swing back and test the top of this wedge, it would happen, just a rough estimate based off those two data points, it would happen by around late March this year, okay? So late March this year, so around 2.5 months to get to around below 70K region. Now, again, so that is one scenario, right? So we can come up here and test that region, and we can draw a line here and kind of understand what we're going to do. So something like that, okay? And then, for example, after we test the top of the wedge, if it hypothetically happens, we could see a breakout, right? And if we do see a breakout of this wedge, and this is looking very far into the future, the logical target for the breakout, if we take an extrapolation of data from this wedge, from the bottom to the top, and extrapolate that to the breakout point, the logical target would be around 125,000 US dollars per Bitcoin. And so that would happen, probably would take maybe 6 months to a year to play out, and we'd be seeing that by maybe late 2022, early 2023, if that was to play out. However, that's extremely unlikely from this point. It's very kind of irrational to be talking about such scenarios right now, but that is a scenario, and so we can draw some sort of line here that maybe that will happen, right? The other scenario is we test the top of this wedge, and then we drop downwards to the bottom again, and if we take extrapolations of data of how long it usually takes to go to the bottom, we can see it took around 100 days here, and we can see it took around 60 days there. So if we're extrapolating that data a bit further, we could say it's going to take around 40 days. Okay, so let's see what a 40-day drop here would look like. It would look like, around April this year. So late April this year takes around 47,000. So if we just draw that line there, that is another scenario that would play out, right? So what we're seeing here on Bitcoin is a few scenarios, right? One of which is obviously we just drop below right now. The other of which is we see a dead cat bounce and we drop below later. All right. The other of which is we go to the top of the wedge, then reject and come down. The other of which is we go to the top of the wedge and break out. So there's a lot of things to be looking at. But I guess the point of the video is not to make a prediction of what's going to happen, because I've already done that. I already think we're going to be bearish, right? What I would say, if we delete all these lines, what I would say on Bitcoin is we're going to see one of two scenarios, okay? This is my personal prediction. I think we're going to see a dead cat bounce to 53k at the maximum, okay? And then a drop down, or we're just going to go straight below and reject from it, okay? But I think the dead cat bounce is probably a little bit more likely, but I'm not fully convinced by it due to the recent weekly close. So one of those two scenarios where we see something like this both times, I still think we're going to go to the downside. However, I'm just pointing out the bullish scenario based off this chart, that there is an argument to be made that we could swing to the upside one more time. And then obviously if there's enough momentum in the market, we could actually break out to the upside. But, you know, betting on that happening right now is extremely illogical, especially considering, you know, not even regarding all of the recent technicals that we've lost, but this whole pattern, right, this massive pattern here, is an ascending wedge formation. Ascending wedge formations alone, with no other evidence considered, break to the downside 70 to 80% of the time. Okay, so they're very bearish formations, and so betting on a break to the upside is illogical, regardless of the fundamentals, regardless of the other technicals. And so if we did see that swing to the upside, it would be likely that it would be a rejection and we'd ultimately end up coming back down. Okay, but I think that right now we're not going to see a swing back to the upside. However, it is a possibility we need to assess. If we break over 53k, and this is what I will say about Bitcoin, if we break over 53k in the short term, I would be targeting the top of this wedge. Okay, break over 53k, I'm targeting 72k, somewhere in that region. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one.